He says, hey, when it comes to your anxiety, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think logically about the things that you are afraid of and that you're worried about. And when we look at some basic neuroscience, we can understand why Paul would say this, because neuroscientists are telling us this about our brain. There's two parts of our brain that are related to our anxiety. The first part is this small part that's deep inside of our brain called the amygdala, and the second part is the front part of the brain called our prefrontal cortex. Now, the amygdala, that just serves as the warning system of our brain. So whenever we see something that we're afraid of, it sends these signals to our body to say it's time to get into fight or flight mode. And so if it sees a threat or something to be afraid of, it'll tell us, hey, get away or get ready to fight. Now, the problem with the amygdala is that the amygdala is not objective at all. It can just see any threat, and then it can just send us into fight or flight. This is why the prefrontal cortex here comes into play and why it's necessary. Because what it does is it takes the threat that the amygdala sends, and it says, okay, we need to think logically about this and determine if this is a real threat or not. A great example would be this. Imagine if you and I decided, hey, it's Halloween time, we're going to go ahead and go to a haunted house, and we're going to pay money to go into this haunted house and to see what's inside there. And so we pay money, we walk down the hall of this haunted house, and then all of a sudden, outside of the corner, this guy in a hockey mask with a chainsaw jumps out right in front of us. It's our amygdala that tells us, hey, wait a second, I've seen this movie before, this does not end out well for us. And so our body gets ready to either run or to fight. But our prefrontal cortex is going to kick in and say, hey, wait a second, let's think logically about this. You paid money to go into this hallway and to get scared. And so that's why this guy in a hockey mask has jumped out in front of us. Don't run away and don't kick the poor college student who's wearing the hockey mask in the face. It's not going to be good. And that's how the brain will work to process fears. Like, what if this guy with a hockey mask shows up? Now, when our anxiety kicks in, our anxiety imagines a threat. And it begins to wonder, well, what if around that hallway there's a guy in a hockey mask and a chainsaw over there? Or what if over in that corner there's a guy with a hockey mask and a chainsaw over there? Or what if when I walk out into the parking lot, there's a guy with a hockey mask and a chainsaw there? Or what if when I get home and I open my front door to walk inside, there's a guy in a hockey mask and a chainsaw there? Our anxiety just begins to imagine that threat over and over and over again. And what happens is we live in a perpetual state of fight or flight. I just heard the story the other day of this lady who had this deep anxiety about a burglar breaking into her house. And so every night she would go through this routine with her husband. They had these cameras installed in their house, and she would make her husband check it out a couple times a night, and then she would have him go to all the doors in the house and just make sure everything's locked, and then she would have him double check it and then triple check it, and then she would have him do it with the same thing with the windows, and just go to all the windows and just double check, triple check, make sure everything is all locked. And this would happen night after night after night. Well, one night they're asleep upstairs in their bed, and they hear a noise downstairs, and the wife hears it. She wakes up her husband. She says, hey, I heard a noise down there. I want you to go downstairs and see what's going on down there. And so the husband just goes ahead, he walks downstairs, and he looks what's down there, and sure enough, there's a burglar. And so he goes to the burglar and says, hey, I know this is a little odd, but can I take you upstairs and introduce you to my wife? She's been talking about you for the last 10 years. And that's what anxiety does. In fact, neuroscientists are telling us that anxiety, when anxiety just takes deep root inside of our brains, it actually begins to create these new pathways in our brains that when we get afraid, it actually bypasses the prefrontal cortex or the logic center of our brain altogether. It's like when we work out and then we stop working out, what happens? Our muscles start to get softened and weaken and grow smaller. When anxiety sets into our brain, it begins to rewire our brain. Now, the good news for us is this, is that according to Paul and according to research, we can do some things to change that. I mean, even if you're not a Christian, you can look at what Paul says, and you can begin to put that into practice and experience the benefits of that. Now, I'm not saying, hey, you just go ahead and fix yourself, and then everything will be fine. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is by God's help, and by looking at what we think about, we can begin to change what anxiety has done to our mind. And if we look at Paul's lesson, what Paul says is we need to just think about what we think about, because not every thought is worth thinking about. When the anxious thoughts begin to come deep inside our mind, we can just tell ourselves, hey, let's think about what we think about. Because not every thought is worth thinking about. Because our thoughts can bring us anxiety or they can bring us peace. And we can choose what thoughts we want to think about. And so, what thoughts should we think about? Well, Paul gives us the list. Let's put it back up here. He said, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about those things. You know, when it comes to this word true, for me, this was the deep part of my anxiety, because when I was feeling anxious, I would begin to imagine things. I would begin to imagine problems and imagine conflicts that didn't even exist. And so these things that I would imagine, I would get anxious about those. And so Paul says, well, think about what's real, not what's imaginary. Think about what's true, or noble, or good, or right. This word pure literally means to be free from contaminants. And there's some anxious thoughts that we have that are toxic thoughts. They're toxic thoughts about the things we're afraid of, or maybe even toxic thoughts about other people. And so what Paul says, we want to think pure thoughts, thoughts that are free from these toxic contaminants. And then whatever is lovely or admirable or excellent or praiseworthy. This goes back to what we talked about when we wanted to list the things that we were grateful for. Because when we are grateful for them, we can focus on them. We can dwell on them. We can think about those things. And Paul says, I want us to meditate on these. I want our mind to dwell on these things. And when we do that, this incredible thing happens. The God of peace will be with us. And so Paul says, think about what you think about, because not every thought is worth thinking about. And this is the difference between what Paul is talking about meditation and some Eastern views of meditation. Because some Eastern views of meditation would say, we just need to empty our mind and release those anxious thoughts. And while that's true, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's just incomplete. That's just the starting point. Paul says when we empty our mind, we want to fill it up with something else. We want to think about these thoughts that come from God. And once I heard this described this way, and I thought this was brilliant, so I wanted to share this with us. But I want us to imagine, like, this jar is our mind. And our mind is going to be filled up with different types of thoughts. And what's natural for all of us is to have anxious and dark thoughts come in and fill up our mind. These are the what ifs. Well, what if that breaks? What if she leaves? What if I don't get that promotion? What if I don't get that job? What if I lose my job? What if my kids never turn it around? What if my health goes bad? What if I never get healthy again? And we just have these anxious thoughts just come in and just fill up our mind over and over again. And many of us, we realize this, we can't live this way. And so we work to empty our mind. And so we say things like, I'm not going to think about that. I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to dwell on something else. You know, in fact, I might even just do whatever I can to be distracted from this. And so I'm just going to go ahead and mask my anxiety. Whatever I can do to not focus on these anxious thoughts, I'm just going to empty my mind of that. And so we empty our mind from those thoughts. Problem is our mind is empty. And our mind can't stay empty for long. Now, I know some wives here are saying, have you met my husband? And I'm not going to go there. But what happens is with an empty mind, it's going to fill up with some other thoughts. And if we're not intentional with what we think about, what's going to happen is the anxious thoughts are going to come in and try to fill up our mind again. And so what we learn from Paul is we want to take the first step and we want to empty our mind. We want to release those anxious, dark thoughts, and we want to release them, but then we want to fill our mind up. And according to Paul, here's what we fill our mind up. We think about what is true. We think about what is noble, what is praiseworthy, what is excellent or admirable. We hold on to the things that we are grateful for and what God has done in the past. And we think about those, we dwell on those, we meditate on those, and then we fill our mind up with these pure thoughts. And we dwell on that. And here's what we discover. That when the anxious thoughts come, because they will come, there's no room for them. Because we have chosen to think about these pure thoughts that are from God.